Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the blazing silence of a world where gods don't whisper, they roar. You're standing on cracked earth beneath a bronze sky, the air thick with dust and the faint metallic scent of blood. Around you, the horizon quivers in the heat like something alive. People here don't pray for comfort, they bargain for survival. And the being they bargain with, the one who claims to own the storm, the lightning, the very breath in your lungs, doesn't play nice. But before we sink in and let the world melt away, let me ask for one quick favor. Hit like right now. Seriously, it helps more than you know. And only subscribe if you want to make sure you never miss another journey like this. Done? Good. Now, dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's story. You trudge through the desert, and it's not just sand you're walking on. It's the birthplace of the oldest fear humanity ever named. The Old Testament God didn't come from temples or gardens. He was born from scarcity, from the howl of a wind that could strip the flesh off your bones. Every grain of sand was a reminder that power and mercy are rationed things. You see, in the ancient Near East, gods were measured by their ability to control chaos. Egypt had the Nile. Babylon had the rivers Tigris and Euphrates. Israel had rocks, snakes, and thirst. No lush fields, no fertile deltas, just an environment that punished weakness. It's no wonder then that the deity who rose from this wasteland wasn't a gentle shepherd. He was a storm in human form, capricious, commanding, absolute. Historians still argue whether Yahweh began as one god among many, a tribal war deity who muscled his way to supremacy. What's certain is that his followers didn't imagine a cuddly father figure. They imagined a general, a being who promised victory in battle if they obeyed, and annihilation if they didn't. You can almost hear it, the crack of thunder rolling over a camp of wanderers. Fires flicker against stone altars. The people stare up, trembling. They've just fled Egypt, a superpower, armed with nothing but faith. And that faith isn't comfort, it's a leash. When Yahweh first introduces himself in the early Hebrew texts, it isn't through gentle revelation, it's through plagues, lightning, famine, and war. He doesn't ask to be loved, he demands to be feared. I am who I am, he says, as if the sentence itself is a weapon. It's less an introduction and more a warning label. And in that time, it works. The world they lived in rewarded brutality. A god too kind would have been devoured by harsher ones. Power meant protection. The Israelites didn't worship because they wanted affection. They worshipped because they wanted to survive. You can picture it at night, the stars scattered across the endless dark, the campfires huddled like fragile lungs breathing against the cold. In the distance, wolves. Above, silence so deep it feels alive. That's when they tell their stories, the ones where God drowns armies, burns cities, and parts oceans like a blade through flesh. The message is simple. The universe is dangerous, but so is our protector. There's a kind of safety in that. Knowing your God is scarier than everyone else's. Knowing that his temper might save you, even if it scares you. The early Israelites didn't see tyranny, they saw insurance. If God is cruel, it's only because he has to be. But you can sense the tension building, because once fear becomes the foundation of faith, what happens when the fear never stops? There's an old fringe theory, scholars still debate it, that the earliest image of Yahweh was linked to volcanic activity. Some think Mount Sinai wasn't just metaphorically on fire when Moses climbed it, it was literally erupting. Imagine that, your God appearing through columns of smoke and molten rock? Not exactly a Hallmark moment. The desert you're walking through tonight is a psychological landscape as much as a physical one. Every command, every punishment, every thou shalt not, carved into the mind like writing on stone. You realize this isn't just religion, it's survival programming. The people needed rules that scared them more than the wilderness did. You pass a caravan of traders whispering about Egypt's gods, Isis, Ra, Osiris, all smiling idols and golden temples. Your God, invisible, unseen, utterly untouchable. It's almost like he's a reflection of the desert itself, impossible to hold, always shifting, always one sandstorm away. And yet, he demands loyalty as if he's right beside you, breathing down your neck. That's the paradox that defines the Old Testament's earliest pages. Intimacy through fear. You're told this God loves his people, but every act of love is drenched in fire. You wonder, if this is love, what does hate look like? You walk on, and the sand begins to sting your eyes. Ahead, you can see a group kneeling, faces pressed into the dirt. They're praying after a recent victory. The enemies are gone, obliterated, buried beneath stone. The Lord is mighty, someone whispers, but their tone sounds less joyful and more relieved, like someone who's narrowly escaped a wild animal. The truth is, in this early world, God's rage is the only constant. He kills the wicked, yes, but also the curious, the careless, the unlucky. Touch the ark wrong? Dead. Complain about food? Plague. Look back at the wrong city? Salt statue. The pattern is clear. Obedience isn't virtue, it's self-preservation. And yet, despite it all, you can't look away. There's a strange beauty in the chaos. The desert wind hums through your ears, and you realize tyranny and devotion are two sides of the same coin. Without his fury, maybe there'd be no faith at all. One night, a storyteller beside the campfire grins and says, "Our God doesn't sleep." It sounds like a boast, but also a warning. A God who never rests, never stops watching. You lie awake later, staring at the stars. You think about what it means to worship something that can't be reasoned with, something that doesn't explain itself. Maybe, you think, the Old Testament God acts like a tyrant because his world demanded one. A universe of floods, famine, and war needed a ruler who mirrored it. Maybe, for the Israelites, divine terror was the only kind of order that made sense. Still, as your eyelids grow heavy, you can't shake the feeling that this story, your story, isn't about a God who's cruel for cruelty's sake. It's about people learning that power, even divine power, always comes at a cost. And you wonder, quietly to yourself, if fear built their faith, what will it take to unbuild it? You wake to a sun that feels like it's punishing you for existing. The air hums with heat, the horizon shimmers, and the ground cracks like old parchment. You're walking across a world that doesn't care whether you make it through the day, and that, right there, is where divine authority was born. Power in the desert isn't just admired, it's worshipped. And in the beginning, Yahweh's hour doesn't come from mercy or compassion, it comes from survival. You see it everywhere, in the way the tribes march, in how they ration their water, in how they whisper his name like it might sting if said too loud. This God is a mirror of the wasteland, beautiful from a distance, lethal up close. When storms roll in, they're not just weather, they're his mood swings. Thunder becomes command, lightning, punishment. And people don't ask why the world is cruel, they ask how to stay on the right side of the cruelty. Historians still argue whether the earliest Israelites actually invented monotheism or just stripped their pantheon down to one dominant deity. Some suggest Yahweh began as a regional storm god, an invisible enforcer whose personality evolved with his people's desperation. But others say no, this was something else, something born from trauma rather than theology. You see, every society creates the god it needs most. Egypt needed a god who could flood the Nile on schedule. Babylon needed one who could build empires from mud. Israel needed a God who could terrify chaos into submission. Because chaos wasn't an idea, it was sand in your mouth, thirst in your throat, and enemies waiting just beyond the next dune. You imagine the night fires, families huddled beneath stars that feel too sharp, telling each other the stories that make the terror make sense. He brought water from the rock, they say. He smote our foes. And, between the lines, what they really mean is, he's the only thing scarier than death itself. There's a quirky fringe theory among biblical archaeologists that traces the earliest depictions of Yahweh not to Canaan or Mesopotamia, but to the Edomite highlands, volcanic, unstable, a place where the earth itself felt alive and angry. If true, it would explain a lot: the smoke, the fire, the constant need for obedience. It wasn't just a metaphor, it was geology. Power in a wasteland, after all, isn't just about who commands, it's about who controls fear. And Yahweh, more than any other ancient god, mastered that art. He didn't build temples at first, he builds a reputation. Every miracle doubles as a warning. Every punishment becomes a sermon. You cross him, you die. You please him, you live. Barely. You can feel the psychology of it pressing in on you. Fear becomes faith. Faith becomes identity. And identity becomes armor. That's how a scattered group of desert wanderers start to see themselves as a chosen people. Not because they're privileged, but because they're still breathing. You pass a group of elders debating at a camp. One gestures wildly, saying, "He fed us in the desert, but he can starve us too." Another nods solemnly. That's how we know he's real. It's an almost comical logic, love measured by how convincingly someone can destroy you, but in this world, it makes sense. Even today, psychologists talk about trauma bonding, when victims cling to the very source of their fear because it gives them a sense of meaning. The ancient Israelites didn't have that term, but they lived it. Every plague, every command, every impossible demand carved that bond deeper. You look at the terrain around you, dry wadis like veins across the land, caves pockmarking the hills. Somewhere in those caves, perhaps, early scribes will one day scratch the first stories of Genesis or Exodus, not as theology, but as a coping mechanism. The Genesis flood, for instance, it isn't just myth, it's a memory. Mesopotamian flood legends predate the Bible by centuries, but Israel's version twists it. A tyrant God who destroys and renews, who punishes and spares. It's divine chaos management. But the pattern is clear. Whenever things get too calm, Yahweh shakes the ground again. He's not just the protector, he's the antagonist. And in that tension, the Israelites discover something radical. Fear can unify. Nothing bonds people like surviving the same unpredictable parent. You find yourself wondering, did they ever question it? Did anyone ever say, what if he's too much? Maybe. Maybe that's why there are golden calves hidden in the margins of their stories. Maybe that's why prophets keep appearing, half comforters, half messengers of doom, trying to translate divine tantrums into meaning. Historians still debate whether early Israelite religion was actually monotheistic at all. Ancient inscriptions mention Yahweh and his Asherah, a possible consort, a goddess long since erased. If true, it means early worship wasn't about purity of belief. It was about survival of influence. You worshipped whoever got results, and Yahweh, with his storms and victories, delivered results, brutally. As the night cools, you stop near a ridge overlooking a camp. Smoke curls from small fires below. You hear children reciting something rhythmic, early laws maybe, or fragments of a psalm. The repetition is hypnotic, almost soothing, until you realize every line is about fear. Fear of disobedience, fear of abandonment, fear of the God who is always watching. It's ironic, isn't it? The people who would later define morality and justice begin with a deity who seems allergic to both. But in this world, just doesn't mean fair. It means effective. The weak die, the loyal endure. It's survivalism dressed in theology. You glance toward the mountains where the horizon glows faintly red. Maybe lightning, maybe something worse. You can't tell whether it's a sign of life or destruction, and maybe that's the point. In the desert, those two are the same thing. Somewhere, a storyteller laughs and says, "Our God's breath makes the sand dance." You think of it differently. Maybe his breath is the sandstorm, the thing that blinds you, buries you, and forces you to crawl on faith alone. And still, they follow. Still, they believe. Because a tyrant God in a wasteland is better than no God at all. Because when the earth itself wants you dead, cruelty starts to look like compassion. You fall asleep to the sound of wind scraping over stone, and in that half-dreaming haze, you realize the truth. In the beginning, Yahweh's power wasn't moral, it was meteorological. A storm's mercy is just the pause before it hits again. And tomorrow, when the sun rises and the sand burns your feet anew, you'll remember that the Old Testament God didn't act like a tyrant despite the desert. He acted like one because of it. You wake before sunrise, when the desert still pretends to be gentle. The air is cool, the dunes hushed, and for a fleeting moment you could almost believe the world is kind. But then you hear it, low voices, reciting prayers that sound more like apologies. The Israelites are awake too, kneeling in the dust. Their leader calls them chosen. You can't help but notice no one looks happy about it. Being chosen, you realize, isn't a compliment, it's a contract. And Yahweh's version of chosen feels less like being invited to a banquet and more like being drafted into an army. You don't get to say no. The word chosen once sounded glorious, set apart, favored, but in this world, it's a warning. The chosen are the ones God watches the closest. They're the first to be punished when they slip. They live under a sky that's equal parts promise and threat. You see it in the stories that pass through campfires: Noah, Abraham, Moses. Every chosen one is tested to the breaking point. Obedience isn't rewarded, it's verified through pain. You can't help thinking of Abraham's trembling hands as he raises the knife over Isaac. The whole thing reads like a loyalty test devised by a cosmic dictator. Historians still argue whether these stories were meant to glorify faith or to process trauma. Some scholars think they reflect a shift from polytheistic bargaining to monotheistic submission, a cultural evolution from negotiation to surrender. Before Yahweh, people could bribe the gods with food or song. Now, they must give up their children, their homes, their sense of control. The people call it covenant, you call it contract law with thunder. You follow the group as they pack up their tents, still muttering blessings that sound suspiciously like survival strategies. If we obey, he will guide us. If we rebel, he will strike us. It's faith reduced to a flowchart. Obedience equals life, disobedience equals extinction. There's a scholar's fringe theory that these covenant stories were deliberately written to provoke anxiety, not comfort, anxiety. Because a fearful community is a cohesive one. Fear keeps people from wandering off, literally and spiritually. You can't afford to doubt when your God's punishment is instant and spectacular. You walk beside a young herdsman who whispers, "Sometimes I wonder if we'd be safer unchosen." You glance at him, and he quickly looks away. You both know it's dangerous even to think that. It's hard not to see the pattern. The Israelites are told they're the apple of God's eye, yet they spend most of their time getting slapped for blinking wrong. They win battles, then lose entire generations to famine or plague. It's almost as if Yahweh doesn't want worship, he wants dependency. A God who demands to be needed is, in modern terms, an ancient form of codependency. And maybe that's the secret reason his people can't quit him. Every act of destruction is followed by a promise of rebuilding, every exile by a call to return. It's divine whiplash, punishment followed by tenderness. The effect is intoxicating. You never know which version of God you'll get, the loving father or the ruthless commander. It's the oldest relationship dynamic there is, the abuser who brings flowers the next day. But before you judge too harshly, you remember, this is a world of survival, not therapy. The Israelites didn't have psychologists, they had prophets. And prophets didn't talk about boundaries, they talked about wrath. At night, you hear one shouting in the distance, his voice cracking through the dark. "Repent, for he is jealous." The word jealous echoes like thunder in a canyon. In our time, jealousy sounds small, but in the ancient mind, it was divine proof of ownership. If your God is jealous, it means he's invested, he's watching, he cares enough to strike. And still, you wonder, how does love survive when every act of mercy comes with a death threat attached? Mainstream historians note that this chosen narrative had geopolitical benefits. When you're a small nation surrounded by empires, believing that God personally favors you creates unity. It's not about spiritual superiority, it's about morale. A divine tyrant is terrifying, yes, but he's your tyrant, and that matters. There's an image that sticks with you, a caravan moving through the dust, carrying the Ark of the Covenant. The people walk behind it, eyes low, afraid to touch it, afraid even to glance directly at it. Their God travels with them, but always at a distance. You can't get too close without burning. That distance, holy and dangerous, is the blueprint for how they understand love. When something good happens, rain, victory, food, they say, "He remembered us." When disaster strikes, "He forgot." Their theology is emotional weather. You live and die under the moods of heaven. But deep down, you start to notice something else. The complaints, the murmurs that never make into the songs of praise. Somewhere between the plagues and the promises, people start questioning whether being chosen is worth it. One night, you overhear an elder mutter, "He brought us out of Egypt to kill us here." You think of how many times those words must have been whispered, half in fear, half in defiance. It's the first spark of what will one day become theology, the attempt to understand why a loving God acts like a tyrant. Historians still debate how much of this tension is editorial, added by later scribes trying to reconcile contradictions. But even if rewritten, the emotion feels raw. Being chosen means being exposed, constantly watched, constantly judged. You belong to a God who never turns his eyes away, and that's not always comforting. In the pale dawn, you look back at the trail of footprints stretching behind the camp. Some are deep and sure, others barely press the sand. You realize every step they take is an act of negotiation, between faith and fear, between trust and terror. You smile grimly to yourself. Maybe that's the real definition of chosen, the people who agree to keep walking even when the one leading them keeps changing the rules. And yet, there's beauty in that endurance, because out of this anxious loyalty will grow something remarkable, a theology so powerful it will outlive its empire, its temples, even its geography. But for now, in this desert, being chosen means one thing. You're the first to be tested and the last to rest. You wrap your cloak tighter as the wind begins to rise. The sun crests the dunes, bright and merciless, like an eye that never blinks. You can't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, the Old Testament God acts like a tyrant because that's what his people expected of greatness. After all, in a world that worships power, kindness looks suspicious. The mountain smells of sulfur and wet stone. You climb with everyone else, bare feet, calloused hands, a quiet terror that's been practiced into ritual. It isn't a pilgrimage, it's a summons. The air tastes like metal and old rain. Up here, even speech feels like an insolence. You stand at the lip of Sinai, and the sky is doing its best impression of a drum roll. Voices around you rise and fall like wind over rocks. Children bury their faces in their parents' cloaks. Lightning does not just flash, it writes across the clouds, punctuation marks in a language no human reads without trembling. The mountain is not just a place, it is a performance, a law court, a cathedral made of raw weather. If you imagine the moment as theater, you're not far off. According to the oldest narratives, thunder and smoke were the props, and the voice was the script. Moses climbs, the people wait below, God speaks. The 10 words, later trimmed into 10 commandments, arrive like a manual taped to a live volcano. The law is not handed down in a friendly memo. It is broadcast through smoke, smell, and the kind of acoustic trauma that makes obedience feel like oxygen. Historians still argue whether Sinai was ever an isolated single event or a poetic compression of many rituals drawn together. Some scholars point to similar mountain revelation traditions across the region. Others propose a distinct, climactic memory unique to the Israelites. Either way, the effect is the same. Rules spoken from a place that refuses to be domesticated. You can almost feel the logic. In a world where weather kills you and drought is a slow execution, a law given from a smoking summit looks less like morality and more like survival strategy. The commandments are not merely ethics, they are scaffolding for a fragile society. Do not murder reads not as a platitude, but as infrastructure. Do not covet isn't just virtue, it's social hygiene. The stone tablet isn't just law, it's municipal planning by thunder. There's a quirky little archaeological aside that makes you smile despite the gravity. Some early explorers noticed that the way those tablets were described, heavy, immovable, chiseled, echoes how ancient rulers and scribes actually handled public edicts. Public law tended to be literal and visible, carved on rock, posted at city centers. The ancient toolkit of governance used things you could trip over, not just ideas. It's as if the mountain wanted a billboard. God obliged. Also, old laws make terrible IKEA instructions. You feel the ritual logic pressing inward. To obey is to stay alive. To rebel is to flirt with annihilation. It's no accident that the language of covenant is legalistic. I will be your God if you will be my people. That phrasing reads like contract law signed in ash. The covenant frames religion in a transactional register, favors for fidelity, protection for obedience. That is terrifying and, for a small desert society, efficient. The scene works because it mediates chaos. In a given season, locusts may come. In another, raiders. In another, a sudden deluge. The divine law is a promise and threat packaging that turns cosmic unpredictability into human responsibility. It's easier to say we sinned than to say Weimar climate science failed us, and easier still to rehearse commands by candlelight than to accept that weather has no moral culpability. The mountain offers a narrative you can obey. That matters.
Historians still argue whether the Sinai the text describes corresponds to Jebel Musa or some other peak, whether a volcanic tremor or earthquake triggered the metaphor, or whether the smoke in the earliest poems is figurative. That open debate keeps you awake at the edge of the story. Did a real eruption shape the myth, or did the narrative shape the memory of nature? Either possibility tightens the spine of the tale. Volcano or metaphor, the point remains. Rules coming wrapped in awe inoculate obedience. You sense the human psychology behind the spectacle. Fear makes ritual sticky. Ritual makes communities predictable. Predictability allows granaries, alliances, and generations to persist. The thunderous law is both tyrant and midwife, cruel and protective, terrifying and generative. And that contradiction is part of what keeps you listening. The rules sting, but they also save. It's like being handed a life jacket made of barbed wire. Uncomfortable, but it keeps you afloat. Also, if there's a spare life jacket, maybe don't wear it to the wedding. There's also a moral tension here that becomes a theme later in your life. The difference between obedience because you love and obedience because you fear. Laws from a volcano lean heavily on the latter. They are safety protocols born under duress. The emotional residue is complicated. Gratitude intermingles with resentment, devotion with bargaining. You can catch yourself thinking, occasionally guiltily, that the God on the mountain is less like a father and more like a commanding officer who won't accept absence without a reprimand, which is useful in an army, less useful in a marriage. And yet, tenderness creeps into the margins. Even in the thunder, there are lines that read like care. Honor your father and mother reads like social continuity, not just obedience training. It's about keeping the village's memory alive. Remember the Sabbath gives exhausted people permission to stop working. The law is paradoxically brutal and humane, a ledger written in a hand that both punishes and preserves. You watch the crowd below Sinai, faces uplifted, cheeks wet, mouths shaped into prayer. And you can feel the first real crack of theology forming: suspicion. If God protects through punishment, will human law then imitate punishment? If obedience is survival, what becomes of love? These are the small questions that will later bloom into prophets, philosophers, and poets who will demand a God of compassion rather than command. Historians still argue whether prophetic critique began as ethical reform or political resistance. Either reading makes the cliffside tension sharper. One final thought, mildly ridiculous, wholly human. Imagine if Moses had left a feedback form. Rate your revelation experience, 1 to 5. 1 equals 5 scorched. You'd glance, short circuit, and laugh, and then perhaps bow your head and keep walking. That's the human solution to terrifying divinity. Humor, small and steady, even under thunder. You step down the mountain when the smoke finally thins. The tablets go into the ark, the ritual continues. People return to their tents with laws heavier than bread. Their world will be safer now, in a brittle way. They will also be more anxious, fewer freedoms, more rules. But that is the pact they chose, in the fire. You keep one thought with you as you descend. The commandments were never simply moral teachings. They were survival instructions given in a language a terrified people could not ignore. Smoke, thunder, and stone. And like all survival tactics, they carried the seeds of what would later become conscience.
You wake to the sound of a crowd murmuring in panic. The mountain behind you is still smoldering, its smoke rising like the ghost of a god that refuses to leave. But the people, they've grown restless. Too much waiting, too much silence. And in that silence, something ancient stirs. Fear dressed up as creativity. You follow them down to the camp, where gold glitters in firelight.
Bracelets, rings, ornaments, melted into a shape that is both pathetic and divine. A calf, small enough to touch, bright enough to worship. You already know what this means. When people can't see their God, they build one. The air smells of ash and honeyed metal. A woman is laughing, too loudly, like someone laughing to drown out the truth that she's afraid. The drumming starts. The songs rise. It's not blasphemy, not yet. It's relief. The kind that comes after too many nights staring at thunder without answers. The God of Sinai has gone silent, so they make a God that listens. It's almost funny if it weren't tragic. Historians still argue whether the golden calf story reflects a real rebellion or a political allegory. Some suggest it was a condemnation of rival cults, tribes who worshipped bull deities like Apis in Egypt or Baal in Canaan. Others think it's psychological, a dramatization of humanity's need for a visible, manageable divine. You watch the people dance, their faces gleaming in the fire. They don't look wicked, they look exhausted, like children trying to soothe themselves after being scolded by a father they can't see. And that's when the shouting starts. From the mountain's shadow, a figure descends, Moses. His hair wild, his face lit by the embers of fury and heartbreak. He's carrying the tablets, the rules carved by the same God these people just replaced with sculpture. You know what happens next. The crash, the shattering, the sound that echoes not like thunder this time, but like disappointment. It's easy to call this a story of betrayal, but it's also a story about timing. Humanity had just been handed the first organized moral system in history and immediately broke it. That irony is so human it hurts. And maybe that's the point. You realize that this isn't just a myth about divine jealousy, it's about dependency, about a God trying to raise a civilization out of infancy, and a civilization still clinging to its need for tangible comfort. It's the oldest parental argument in history. I told you not to touch that, versus, but you weren't here. Moses' wrath is brutal. 3,000 people die, the rest fall silent. It feels excessive, disproportionate, even cruel. Yet, when you look closer, the story reads like a mirror of human anxiety projected on heaven. When God feels distant, leaders panic. When leaders panic, people bleed. There's a quirky anthropological tidbit tucked into this chaos. Ancient societies often used festivals to reset divine favor, rituals that involved chaos, dancing, and feasting to mimic cosmic disorder before reestablishing order. It's possible the calf story records one of those, later rewritten as heresy, which, if true, means the so-called rebellion was really just ancient therapy. Historians still argue whether this event marked the birth of monotheistic discipline or just another episode in a long tug-of-war between faith and fear. But one thing is certain, the calf became shorthand for idolatry, for humanity's refusal to sit still in the absence of comfort. You glance back at the mountain, still smoking like a wounded heart, and think about how fragile that first covenant must have been. Commandments carved in stone, yes, but hearts still made of wax. It's easy to call these people foolish, harder to admit we are no different. You've built your own calves, golden screens, glowing icons, words you check for meaning instead of listening for silence. You hear Moses shouting still, his voice cracking through the crowd. Who is on the Lord's side? It's less a command than a cry of exhaustion, because even the prophet knows that faith enforced by fear collapses the second fear fades. You stay a moment longer, watching the calf melt back into shapeless gold, dripping into the sand. The night returns to stillness, but the damage lingers. And as you turn away, a quiet realization hits you. The Old Testament God didn't act like a tyrant because he loved power. He acted like a tyrant because his people only listened when he did. That's not justification, it's a tragedy. The kind that repeats. You walk through the cooling sand and feel the mountain's heat fade behind you. The air smells of metal and guilt. Somewhere, the wind carries the faintest whisper. Neither thunder nor fire this time, just words. If you must build an image, let it be a reflection.
The desert stretches ahead of you like a wound that never quite healed. The golden calf is gone, the law restored, but the people still wander, physically, morally, spiritually. Every grain of sand seems to whisper the same question: what happens after forgiveness? You travel with them, boots full of dust, throat burning, heart heavy. Days bleed into weeks, weeks into decades. Manna falls like snow each morning, sweet, strange, temporary. Enough to live, never enough to settle. It's a clever kind of mercy, survival without comfort. Historians still argue whether the 40 years in the wilderness were literal or symbolic. Some say the Israelites needed a generation to die before entering the Promised Land, a reset of cultural memory. Others suggest the wandering was theological, a long detox from dependency, a period when humanity had to learn what to do when the voice of God stopped booming from mountaintops. You suspect both are true. Because what better way to train a people than to let them walk in circles until they learn to walk straight? The desert becomes a classroom. The lessons come without warning. Serpents, famine, mutiny, mercy. The same story, played in different keys. Each time the people complain. Each time they are forgiven, until the next complaint. And you can't help but smile a little at the pattern. Humanity treats God like bad customer service. We'd like to speak to the manager. It's funny, until it isn't. Because one day, the complaints stop being funny. One day, they build into rebellion. The people grumble not just about food or thirst, but about leadership. Moses is old, the desert is endless, and the promise feels like a lie. You remember that moment vividly, the ground splitting, swallowing those who rose against him. No fiery speech, no second chances, just the earth opening like an animal's mouth. A brutal metaphor, if it even was one. Historians still argue whether that event, the rebellion of Korah, was myth or moral instruction. Some think it's a story invented later to discourage insurrection against priestly authority. Others think it's an allegory of entropy. Every order eventually collapses from within. You can feel both readings humming under your skin. Because if the Old Testament God acts like a tyrant, he's not doing it randomly. He's doing it like a parent terrified that their children will destroy themselves the second the fence comes down. The wilderness becomes therapy through deprivation. It strips away idols, comfort, distraction, everything except the raw relationship between a frightened species and its invisible caretaker. And yet you start to notice something new. Amid all the punishment and panic, there's care. Strange, conditional, sometimes manipulative, but care nonetheless. The people cry for food, and food comes. They cry for water, and water flows, from a rock no less. It's the divine equivalent of a parent saying, "Fine, but just this once." A fringe scholar once joked that the desert years are the Bible's toxic relationship arc. It's the season when both parties, humanity and divinity, realize they're stuck with each other. The people can't survive without God, God can't fulfill his covenant without people, and neither seems particularly happy about it. The more you think about it, the more you see that tyranny in this story isn't about domination. It's about desperation. Because what kind of God micromanages unless the stakes are extinction? You watch as the tents shimmer in the evening heat. Manna cools on the sand.
Children chase shadows. An entire generation living on borrowed patience. And then you see Moses, alone again, staff in hand, face weathered by wind and warning. He's looking out at the horizon he'll never cross. That's the cruelest irony of all. The man who spoke with God face to face will die in sight of the promise he spent his life chasing. When he strikes the rock in frustration, you can feel it. Something breaks in him. He's not punished for disobedience, he's punished for exhaustion. And maybe that's the truest form of tyranny. Not the God who demands too much, but the world that never gives you time to rest. The desert begins to quiet. The children who were born wandering will inherit a land their parents only dreamed of. A new generation that doesn't remember thunder. You stay behind with the old prophet. He looks at you, eyes soft, voice steady. He's not cruel, he says, though he sounds like he's trying to convince himself. The wind picks up, carrying sand across your feet. You watch Moses disappear over the ridge. And in the distance, the voice of God fades, not as a threat, but as a sigh. The tyrant is learning patience. The children are learning faith. And you're beginning to understand that maybe wrath and love are just two tones of the same thunder.
You stand at the edge of the Jordan River, watching the sunlight flash off the surface like coins. Behind you lies 40 years of sand, silence, and second chances. Ahead, a land that smells of milk, honey, and danger. This is the threshold moment, the pause between punishment and promise. The wilderness generation is gone, their bones buried beneath dunes that now whisper like ghosts. You belong to the new blood, the ones who only know the stories of thunder, not the sound itself. And yet, even now, the fear lingers. You can feel it in the way people glance at the sky, as if expecting another command, another calamity. The covenant feels less like a blessing and more like a contract signed in fire. Historians still argue whether this moment, crossing into Canaan, represents divine fulfillment or moral colonization. Some call it destiny, others imperial theology. After all, the story reads like conquest, a chosen people taking a chosen land. But beneath that, you sense something more fragile, an anxious God trying to keep a promise to a people who barely understand him. The river looks ordinary enough, but you know better. In ancient texts, water is never just water. It's chaos, the unknown, the space between old and new worlds. And crossing it requires faith or desperation or both. When the priests step in first, the current stops. The water heaps up, silent, obedient. It's not thunder now, it's choreography. You can't help but smile. Apparently, even chaos knows when to hold its breath. The people cross, eyes wide, feet dry. A miracle, yes, but also an eerie rehearsal of control. A God who parts seas and halts rivers is not just loving. He's asserting order over nature itself. And order, as you've learned, always carries a shadow of tyranny. You walk last, half expecting the water to crash back early. It doesn't. It waits, patient as a held grudge. Once across, Joshua, the new leader, takes 12 stones from the riverbed and stacks them into a monument. A reminder, he says, so your children will never forget. You run your fingers over the smooth surface. The stones are cold, heavy, permanent. And that's when you realize every covenant ends up carved in something harder than memory. A fringe scholar once suggested that the Old Testament isn't just about faith, it's about record-keeping. God as archivist, humanity as documentation. Each miracle, each massacre, a receipt for obedience rendered or disobedience punished.
You can almost see the celestial ledger, plagues delivered, manna dispensed, idols destroyed. It's bureaucratic in a cosmic way. But crossing into the promised land changes the tone. The God who once led with thunder now leads through silence. The pillar of cloud is gone. The manna stops falling. And suddenly the people have to farm. Freedom, it turns out, feels a lot like anxiety. You can't blame them for missing the certainty of miracles. When every meal is an act of labor instead of grace, the nostalgia for divine dictatorship kicks in fast. Historians still argue whether the wars that follow, the sieges, the purges, the infamous fall of Jericho, were divine justice or human ambition dressed in holy language. Some say God commanded it. Others think the Israelites wrote it that way later to justify conquest. Either way, the God of the Old Testament remains consistent. He demands exclusivity. No idols, no half measures, no tolerance for divided loyalties. It's love through monopoly. And you can almost hear the echo of an ancient insecurity in that exclusivity, as if the creator of universes still worries about being forgotten. The walls of Jericho fall with a sound that shakes your chest. Trumpets blaring, dust rising, cries splitting the air. It's victory, but it feels wrong. You step over the rubble and see the aftermath. Men shouting, women weeping, flames eating through wood and cloth. It's not the divine spectacle the priests promised. It's just another human war, only with better branding. You wonder if heaven flinched when it saw what obedience looks like up close. And yet, in the quiet that follows, something strange happens. Joshua orders the spoils burned, not kept. It's not for us, he says. It's for the Lord. You think about that, how even in victory, this God refuses human greed. Tyrant or not, he doesn't want their trophies, just their trust. A quirky little inscription found centuries later mentions Jericho's walls collapsing possibly due to earthquake, not trumpets. But that doesn't make the story less powerful. In fact, it deepens it. Maybe the real miracle wasn't supernatural force, but the timing. Chaos arriving exactly when obedience reached its peak. Historians still argue whether that timing was divine design or coincidence sanctified after the fact. You prefer to think of it as choreography again. The old God learning to guide through rhythm, not rage. You look at the sky as the sun bleeds into gold. For the first time, the heavens are silent, not in absence, but in peace. And maybe that's the real promised land. Not geography, not conquest, but a silence that no longer feels threatening. You kneel, scoop up one of the river stones, and whisper a thought you'd never dare say aloud before. Maybe you were never trying to rule us. Maybe you were trying to teach us how to rule ourselves.
You wake to the sound of cicadas singing over the fields of Canaan. The war drums have stopped, and for the first time in generations, the air smells like harvest instead of blood. The land is good, richer than rumor promised, but uneasy, because peace is harder to manage than conquest. You walk through vineyards heavy with grapes, and yet something inside you feels hollow. This is supposed to be paradise, the reward for obedience, the proof that all the suffering meant something. But it doesn't feel like fulfillment. It feels like a layover. The people, too, are restless. They build homes and altars, plant crops and children. But every festival, every prayer carries a quiet question. Is he still watching? The old God doesn't thunder anymore. No plagues, no pillars of fire, no daily bread from the sky. Just silence and sunsets. And silence, for people raised on spectacle, feels like abandonment. Historians still argue whether this period, often called the era of the Judges, represents spiritual decline or natural evolution. The pattern is painfully human. Obedience brings prosperity. Prosperity breeds complacency. Complacency invites collapse. Then, when things go wrong, everyone repents, the sky clears, and the cycle begins again. You can almost see the divine exhaustion between the lines. It's the same frustration every parent feels when their child learns the hard way what they've been warned about 1,000 times. A quirky historian once joked that the Book of Judges could have been subtitled, Israel's on-again, off-again relationship with the Almighty. You watch as the tribes drift apart, each claiming their own slice of promised ground, each insisting that their version of obedience is the correct one. And that's when tyranny shifts form. It's no longer coming from the sky, it's coming from the people themselves. You see small kings rise, charismatic leaders, local heroes, each one claiming divine favor, each one enforcing their version of holiness. Law becomes regional, worship becomes competitive. And in the chaos, something darker creeps back in. The same old hunger for certainty, for hierarchy, for control. The people start asking for a king. You can almost hear the divine groan echoing across centuries. After all this, after thunder, after covenant, after miracles, they still want a middleman. When Samuel delivers the warning, "You will cry out because of the king you have chosen, and the Lord will not answer you in that day," you feel it like a prophecy spoken straight into your bones. Historians still debate whether monarchy was God's reluctant concession or humanity's inevitable regression. Some call it a divine test. Others call it political realism. Either way, it marks a turning point. The people no longer want to serve an invisible God. They want a God with a crown. So they get one. Saul. Tall, impressive, the kind of man people would follow into battle. At first, he's everything they asked for. Courageous, charismatic, chosen. But it doesn't take long for the cracks to show. Jealousy, paranoia, impulsive sacrifice. You watch as the same cycle plays out again. Obedience, pride, punishment. And through it all, the voice of God grows quieter, sadder. You start to understand that the Old Testament God's so-called tyranny might have been grief wearing armor. Every commandment, every curse, every exile, an act of desperate parenting. A fringe scholar once suggested that Yahweh wasn't angry at humanity, he was angry for humanity, furious at their fragility, their tendency to destroy themselves. It's the rage of a craftsman watching his work undo itself. You sit beneath an olive tree, listening to the hum of life around you, the buzzing of insects, the lowing of distant cattle, the faint song of farmers at dusk. The world looks peaceful, but you know it's only a matter of time before another fall. Because comfort breeds forgetfulness. And forgetfulness, in this story, is always fatal. You look at the sky, waiting for thunder that doesn't come. The silence feels intentional, like a test. Maybe the lesson of the wilderness wasn't just obedience, it was independence. Maybe he's waiting to see if you can be good without supervision. The irony doesn't escape you. The God accused of tyranny is now accused of neglect. When he speaks, he's cruel. When he's silent, he's absent. You laugh softly. Humanity is a hard audience. You stand, brush the dust from your robe, and look out at the fields glinting in the evening sun. The promised land stretches before you, like a mirror, reflecting both divine mercy and human restlessness. And somewhere deep inside, you can feel it. The next cycle forming, the calm before another command. Because even in peace, humanity seems to crave a ruler. And somewhere above, or maybe within,
The old god sighs, knowing exactly how this will end.
The throne room smells of cedar and ambition. You stand near the back as Saul paces, his crown gleaming like gilt. The murmurs of advisors echo off the stone, half prayer, half politics. Power, it turns out, doesn't come with holiness included. The people finally have what they wanted, a king they can see. But what they didn't realize is that a visible ruler makes divine judgment easier to misplace. Every failure, every famine, every lost war, someone must be to blame, and it can't be God. You watch Saul unravel in slow motion. At first, he blames enemies, then prophets, then silence. The tyranny that once came from heaven now blooms in human form, a fragile man who mistakes paranoia for piety. Historians still argue whether Saul's downfall was spiritual or psychological. Some say God withdrew his favor. Others say the man simply couldn't carry the weight of expectation. Either way, the pattern continues. Divine authority passed down, corrupted, replaced. Enter David, shepherd, poet, fighter, the kind of man songs are written about before he even dies. When he first steps into the throne's shadow, he looks too small for it. You almost laugh until he kills a giant with a single stone. It's the oldest metaphor in the book: faith against force, humility against hubris. But you've seen enough of this story to know how it ends. The shepherd becomes the king. The innocent becomes the tyrant. It's the human condition in royal form. You walk through David's Jerusalem, a city half built and half promised. Music floats through narrow streets. Children sing psalms about victory and vengeance in the same breath. Even worship here feels like warfare. Historians still argue whether David existed as a single man or a mythic composite. The archaeological record is quiet, but the poetry is not. In his psalms, you hear the heart of a God-haunted man. One moment begging for mercy, the next bragging about divine vengeance. It's as if the same conflict that burned in heaven has been passed down through his bloodline. You sit by the palace walls one evening, watching David pace the rooftop. Below him, a woman bathes in moonlight. You already know her name. You already know the scandal. You already know that power, when left unchecked, always reenacts the oldest story, Eden retold in flesh and consequence. The next day, a prophet arrives, Nathan. His voice cuts through the air like lightning without the storm. "You are the man," he says. And just like that, tyranny meets accountability. It's rare in these stories, that moment when divine authority turns inward, forcing a king to see his reflection. David breaks, writes poetry from the rubble of his own guilt. The Psalms of repentance, the same words whispered centuries later by monks and mystics, are born out of this collapse. You realize something profound. Every time humanity builds a throne, God finds a way to make it crack. Because power without humility always becomes a mirror of the divine wrath it tries to replace. A quirky detail you remember from some old commentary: the ancient Hebrew word for anointed and Messiah is the same. That means every king was supposed to be a little version of salvation, a stand-in for divine justice. But instead, each one ends up reenacting the curse. The throne, it seems, is cursed to repeat God's hardest lesson. Authority without love is indistinguishable from tyranny. You follow David's reign through its highs and horrors. Victories over enemies, betrayals by his own sons, endless blood that no prayer seems able to wash away. And through it all, you hear a weary echo: "How long, O Lord?" It's not rebellion, it's exhaustion. Historians still argue whether the Old Testament's obsession with kingship was theological critique or national nostalgia.
The texts are conflicted. One verse glorifies the king as God's chosen, the next warns that even the chosen can fall. It's as if the writers themselves were struggling with the same contradiction that defined their deity: love tangled with control. By the end of David's story, you can feel both divine and human fatigue. The throne becomes an altar, and the altar becomes a battlefield. You watch Solomon rise in his father's place, young, brilliant, calm. The kingdom glows like polished gold. Wisdom replaces war, temples replace tents. For a brief moment, it feels like the storm is over. But you already know better. Peace has never been the old God's favorite tempo. It makes people forget whom they feared. You close your eyes and listen to the faint hum of prayer spilling from the new temple's walls. Somewhere deep inside, you can feel that same tension building again, the divine hand tightening its grip, preparing another reminder that obedience never comes cheap. And as the sun sets over the gilded rooftops, you wonder if maybe the God of the Old Testament doesn't act like a tyrant after all. Maybe he just keeps giving his creations what they ask for, until they finally learn to stop asking for it.
The temple glows at sunrise like a crown made of light. You walk its marble courts barefoot, your footsteps echoing against the hush. Incense drifts upward in silver ribbons. The walls themselves seem to hum with devotion. This is Solomon's masterpiece, the meeting place between heaven and earth, the architectural proof that the divine finally has a permanent address. You stand in awe. Everything feels eternal here. The cedar beams, the gold-covered doors, the endless rituals of sacrifice and song. You almost believe the tyrant has retired, replaced by a philosopher king and a God who smiles instead of scowls. Almost. Because you've read enough of this story to know, peace in the Bible is never just peace. It's the eye of a storm. Historians still argue whether Solomon's temple was built by local craftsmen or by conscripted labor from conquered peoples. Some describe it as a golden age of enlightenment. Others call it an empire hiding beneath incense. Either way, the irony is thick. The God who once forbade idols now has a house built entirely to host his presence. And not just any house. It's vast, breathtaking, and, according to the chroniclers, funded by heavy taxation. The people labor, the king prays, the deity resides in splendor. You watch Solomon dedicate the temple with words that sound both beautiful and dangerous. The heavens cannot contain you, how much less this house I have built. It's humility disguised as triumph. The temple is less a gift to God than a monument to understanding Him, and that makes it a mirror, and mirrors in this story always crack. You step outside, into the blinding noon, and hear the markets buzzing, merchants bargaining, soldiers polishing bronze. The city is alive, prosperous, orderly, and yet, beneath that order, you sense a faint vibration of unease. The same hand that wrote proverbs about wisdom is also collecting wives like trophies. The same mouth that prays for understanding whispers deals with foreign gods. Historians still argue whether Solomon's fall was political, spiritual, or simply human. Was his love of foreign women an act of diplomacy or disobedience? Was his temple a triumph or a trap? You suspect both, because every empire eventually mistakes stability for eternity. A quirky archaeological footnote surfaces in your mind. Early excavations near Jerusalem uncovered shrines filled with small female figurines, idols of Asherah, the mother goddess. Evidence that even in Solomon's golden city, people still prayed to the old fertility spirits. The god of fire and law had competition from clay and comfort. You imagine his silence growing heavier,
The once thundering deity now watching as his chosen king builds altars to every passing god. It's almost sad, like a parent realizing their child has outgrown fear and, with it, faith. You wander the outer courts, and in the shadows, you see the next chapter forming. A prophet stands alone by the gate, eyes sharp, voice trembling with the old fury. The Lord will tear the kingdom from you, he warns. The words cut through the air like a crack in marble. You feel it again, that old divine impatience returning, the storm gathering behind the gold. Because the Old Testament God doesn't like equilibrium. Equilibrium breeds arrogance, and arrogance in this story always calls down the hammer. Solomon dies surrounded by splendor. His wisdom survives in Scripture, but his kingdom fractures like pottery left too long in the sun. North against brother. The temple still stands, but the faith that built it starts to drift into ritual without meaning. You stand on a hill overlooking the divided land. Smoke rises from both sides of the horizon, incense from temples and fire from raids. You can't tell which belongs to worship and which to war. And maybe that's the point. Because when religion becomes a system instead of a conversation, tyranny doesn't vanish, it migrates. It moves from heaven to hierarchy, from the divine to the institution. A fringe theologian once said, God's silence after Solomon is not abandonment, it's withdrawal of privilege. Like a teacher leaving the room to see whether the students learned anything. You look up at the sky, half expecting lightning, but nothing comes. Just wind, soft, indifferent, ancient. It hits you then, maybe this silence isn't punishment. Maybe it's the start of freedom. You remember how it all began. Thunder, command, law, fear. Now, at last, the story slows. Humanity has the temple, the wisdom, the tools. The divine has stepped back. But can humanity handle a world where God stops shouting? You smile at the irony. After centuries of fearing his voice, you now fear his quiet. The sun dips below the walls, turning the temple gold one last time. You whisper a prayer, not of praise or petition, but of curiosity. What happens to faith when the teacher leaves the room?
You wake in a city that used to be holy. The gold on the temple has dulled. The streets hum with politics instead of psalms, and prophets now sound more like protesters than messengers. You can smell the shift, the iron tang of anxiety replacing incense. This is the aftermath of Solomon's empire. Wealth without wisdom, worship without wonder. The once unified kingdom has split into two brittle halves, Israel to the north, Judah to the south. Both claim to be the true heirs of God's promise. Both are wrong in the same way. Historians still argue whether this fracture was divine punishment or geopolitical inevitability. Some say it was a spiritual consequence of pride. Others point to trade routes, taxation, and tribal rivalry. Either way, the kingdom built on revelation is now run on rumor and fear. You walk through the marketplace. Merchants sell idols again, tiny silver calves, wooden figures, household gods with smiling faces. You remember the last time that happened, and the outcome wasn't great. But people forget fast when fear runs faster. The old God still speaks, but not to kings anymore. His voice comes through prophets now, lone wanderers shouting on street corners, wild-eyed, uninvited. Men like Elijah who mock priests and challenge monarchs to public miracles, as if trying to remind everyone who really writes the weather report. You see one of them on a hillside, calling down fire in front of a crowd of Baal's priests. The flames roar, the people cheer. The tyrant's thunder returns for one last encore. But when the smoke clears, the awe fades too. The crowd disperses. Tomorrow they'll pray to Baal again. You can almost hear the exasperation in the divine silence afterward. A fringe scholar once joked, "Miracles have a short shelf life." And maybe that's what's happening now. The Old Testament God isn't acting like a tyrant. He's acting like a teacher who keeps giving the same test to a class that never studies. Historians still debate whether the prophet's thunderous sermons were the voice of God or the voice of conscience. Either way, their message cuts through time. Justice over ritual, mercy over sacrifice, love over law. It's as if divinity is evolving from external enforcement to internal awakening. You stand near the city gate as Jeremiah preaches, voice breaking, eyes wet. "I will put my law within them," he says, "and I will write it on their hearts." You feel the shift in that sentence, a turning point centuries in the making. The tyrant of the mountain is learning tenderness. The God who once inscribed law on stone now plans to inscribe it on the human soul. But tenderness has a cost. It means stepping back. And when gods step back, empires fill the silence. Assyria comes first. Iron chariots, burning towns, exiles marching barefoot through the dust. Then Babylon, the temple stripped, the ark stolen, the city reduced to rubble. Jerusalem weeps by the rivers of captivity. You stand among the ruins, the scent of smoke heavy in your throat. The tyranny has shifted again, not from heaven this time, but from human hands. Kings who thought themselves chosen now kneel in foreign courts. And yet, in that loss, something unexpected blooms. Without temple or throne, the people start to discover God everywhere, by rivers, in songs, in silence. The same deity they once feared now feels closer than ever. Historians still argue whether the exile was a national tragedy or a spiritual renaissance. Some call it the death of covenant, others its resurrection. You lean toward the latter, because when faith loses its building, it finally finds its breath. A quirky observation found in exile literature: prayers become shorter, gentler, more introspective. The poetry shifts from thunder to whisper. It's as if the divine, once roaring from heaven, has moved permanently into the human heart. You sit by the river one evening, watching the sun bleed into the water. Around you, others sing softly, not songs of conquest, but of memory. You realize this is what freedom looks like when all else is lost. No land, no temple, no crown, just presence. And maybe that was the goal all along. You remember the mountain, the fire, the law carved in stone, and you laughed quietly. The God who once needed a volcano now needs only a voice. The tyrant has become a teacher, the teacher a companion. But the story isn't done. Because even in exile, people still dream of power, of return, of rebuilding. You close your eyes and hear a familiar whisper, riding the wind. If I give you the world again, will you remember me differently this time?
The years in exile reshape everything. The Israelites who left Jerusalem as captives return as something else: scribes, scholars, survivors. They no longer bring idols in their pockets or kings in their prayers. Instead, they carry scrolls, songs, and the quiet certainty that maybe holiness isn't about place, but presence. You walk among them as they rebuild. The foundation stones of the Second Temple rise from the dust like half-remembered vows. Children chase one another between unfinished walls, laughing in the shadow of sacred ruins. It's a strange homecoming, half joy, half grief. The people sing the old psalms, but their voices tremble. They've seen too much to worship blindly now. Historians still argue whether the return from Babylon was a triumph or a trauma. Some say it marked the rebirth of faith. Others, the birth of religion as we know it, a codified system built to preserve identity under foreign rule. Either way, something fundamental changes here. The covenant becomes text. You can feel the shift even in the air. The once thundering God of Sinai now speaks in ink and parchment. Prophets give way to priests. Revelation turns into regulation. And with every new law copied, the distance grows a little wider. You pass through the marketplace and see scrolls being sold, copies of the Torah, the new anchor for a people without empire. The irony isn't lost on you. The word that once fell like fire from heaven now fits neatly in a leather case. A fringe scholar once called this era the taming of the divine. The God who once shattered mountains now fits inside a sentence. The same words that once commanded obedience now invite interpretation. You find that both comforting and sad. The tyranny is gone, yes, but so is the awe. The new temple rises smaller than the first. The old ones weep when they see it, remembering Solomon's golden walls and the fire that once filled the air. The young ones, though, don't mind. They only know this quieter version of the faith, one built not on spectacle, but survival. Maybe that's progress. Maybe it's fatigue. Historians still argue whether the Second Temple period marks spiritual refinement or religious bureaucracy. You stand in the courtyard and see both, prayer and politics, piety and paranoia. The priests debate ritual purity while foreign soldiers patrol the gates. Faith has become both shield and shackle. Yet, amid all that, you catch glimmers of something beautiful. Families teaching their children the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Not shouted this time, but whispered at dusk. The same words that once sparked wars now sustain identity. You sit beside a scribe one evening as he writes. His hands tremble slightly. Each word, he says, is a thread in the garment of memory. If we stop weaving, we disappear. You realize he's right. Maybe the old God's wrath was never meant to destroy. It was meant to keep the story alive. There's a quirky archaeological tidbit from this period that makes you smile. Excavations near Elephantine in Egypt uncovered a Jewish colony that built its own temple to Yahweh, complete with priests, sacrifices, and correspondence with Jerusalem. A divine franchise. It seems even in exile, people couldn't resist trying to build miniature heavens wherever they went. It's almost endearing. Humanity refusing to let God stay abstract for too long. You walk home through the twilight streets, hearing snippets of prayers in every doorway. No thunder, no fire, just murmurs of gratitude for survival. And that's when it hits you. The God who once acted like a tyrant may have finally achieved what he wanted all along. Obedience, not out of fear, but memory. The people no longer tremble, they remember. And in that remembering, he becomes less of a ruler and more of a rhythm, a pulse running quietly through every meal, every festival, every story told to a child at night. The law carved on stone has moved into hearts, just as Jeremiah once said. The covenant has gone internal. You pause at the temple gate and look up at the sky. No lightning, no smoke, just stars, steady, endless, indifferent. And yet, somewhere in that indifference, you sense a kind of peace. Maybe this is what divine maturity looks like. Not control, not punishment, but the willingness to be quiet. You smile. The tyrant has learned silence. The people have learned memory. And between them, a fragile kind of understanding hums, soft as breath, durable as time.
Centuries slide by like sand through an open palm. The world changes, empires rise and vanish. Persia falls to Greece, Greece to Rome. Languages evolve, borders redraw, but the old stories endure.
copied by candlelight, recited in exile, stitched into lullabies and laws. You find yourself in Jerusalem again, but it's not the same city. The streets are narrower, the temple larger. Its courtyards hum with merchants and priests, pilgrims and soldiers. The air smells of roasted grain, myrrh, and tension. Faith has become infrastructure now. What once began as covenant and voice has calcified into hierarchy and schedule. You walk through the outer court, watching the sacrifices. Doves flutter, blood spills, bells jingle on priestly robes. It's all so organized, so predictable. And you can't help but think God would hate this bureaucracy. Historians still argue whether the Second Temple priesthood preserved holiness or strangled it. Some see it as a necessary safeguard, others as a symptom of divine withdrawal. Because when heaven goes quiet, someone always tries to fill the silence with procedure. And yet, beneath all the rules, you sense something restless. A murmur spreading through the crowds, rumors of prophets wandering the hills again, voices talking not about punishment, but love. You follow the whispers through dusty alleys until you find one of them, a wild-eyed man by the river preaching repentance like it's poetry. His hair tangled, his feet bare, his voice fierce enough to make stone listen. He says the old patterns are ending. He says the kingdom of heaven is near. You feel the desert shift inside you again. Historians still argue whether John the Baptist was a revolutionary or a reformer. Some see him as the last prophet of the old age, others the first voice of something entirely new. Either way, his message is electric. God is no longer waiting on mountains. He's walking among you. It's such a simple claim, but it turns centuries of fear upside down. You think back to Sinai, to the fire and thunder, to the stone and smoke. And now, this? A man in the wilderness eating locusts and honey, saying forgiveness is free? It feels impossible. But then another rumor spreads. A carpenter's son preaching peace, touching lepers, talking about love as if it's contagious. You walk through the crowds to see him, and for a moment you almost don't recognize what you're witnessing. No lightning, no laws, just stories. Parables so gentle you almost miss how subversive they are. Historians still debate whether this figure intended to start a new faith or simply finish an old sentence. Either way, he speaks of the old God not as tyrant, but as Father. And in that single word, you feel the axis of history tilt. The God of wrath, of law, of vengeance, now described as compassion, patience, forgiveness. The same deity, different vocabulary. It's shocking, but also inevitable. Every era of fear breeds an era of tenderness in response. A fringe theologian once said that Jesus wasn't replacing Yahweh. He was revealing the version of him humanity had been too traumatized to see. You think about that for a long time. Maybe the old tyrant wasn't changing at all. Maybe humanity was finally calm enough to see his softer reflection. You watch as he heals a child, laughs with fishermen, weeps at a friend's tomb. No thunder, no plague, no spectacle, just touch. And that's when you realize, this is the same God who once wrote laws on stone, now rewriting them in flesh. The crowd listens, spellbound, as he speaks of mercy over sacrifice, of turning the other cheek, of loving even enemies. You wonder how Moses would have reacted. The priests, of course, don't take it well. They whisper words like blasphemy and danger. Because when authority stops requiring fear, institutions start to tremble. You stay as long as you can, feeling the air shift with every word he says. When he finally walks past you, there's no thunder, no crown, no smoke, just the quiet gravity of someone who doesn't need power to feel divine. And as the crowd disperses, you look up at the sky, clear, unbroken, calm. For the first time, you realize that the God of the Old Testament and the God standing before you might be the same being at two different stages of maturity. One learning to command, the other learning to forgive. And humanity? You've simply been growing alongside him. The city hums beneath you like a beehive as dusk falls. You stand on a ridge overlooking Jerusalem, its rooftops glowing amber, its temple crowned with gold. The carpenter's son walks somewhere below, gathering crowds who hang on every word. Children chase one another through alleys while Roman soldiers patrol the gates. And for a heartbeat, everything feels suspended, like creation itself is holding its breath. Because something in this man's voice unsettles both heaven and empire. He preaches love in a world built on control, forgiveness where vengeance has always ruled. The same God who once demanded sacrifice now kneels to wash feet. It's blasphemy and beauty all at once. Historians still argue whether his words were meant to reform Judaism, replace it, or fulfill it. Some call him a prophet, others a political threat. A few, quietly, start to whisper that maybe this is the same voice that spoke from Sinai, only now speaking through mercy instead of thunder. You follow him through narrow streets. He heals without demanding payment. He feeds thousands with scraps. He speaks of lilies and sparrows as if they're sacred texts. And you can't help but think, the Old Testament God would have burned these people to prove a point. But this one feeds them. Maybe that's the point. A fringe scholar once called the Gospels the divine therapy session. God, after millennia of fire and fury, finally sitting down to talk through his anger. You laugh quietly. It sounds ridiculous, and yet it feels true. Every parable sounds like an apology written in story form. The kingdom of heaven is like a father welcoming home a prodigal child, like a shepherd leaving 99 sheep to find one, like a master forgiving a servant's impossible debt. You realize these aren't just lessons, they're rewrites. Each story dismantles an older one. The God who once drowned the world now rescues it. The one who demanded blood now sheds his own. And that inversion terrifies the powerful. You can feel the tension rising like a storm that's learned restraint. The priests whisper of sedition. The Romans mutter of rebellion. The air thickens with inevitability. Then, one night, it happens. A garden, a kiss, the sound of chains. You follow at a distance as he's led through torchlit streets, mocked, beaten, condemned. The same hands that healed the blind now bound in rope. Historians still argue whether the crucifixion was divine plan or political convenience. Some see sacrifice, others see statecraft. But standing there beneath that wooden cross, you see something else entirely. The Old Testament God crucified by his own reputation. The tyrant has come to die for the tyranny. And as he hangs there, eyes half shut, breath ragged, the sky darkens, not with wrath this time, but grief. The earth shakes. The temple veil tears. The symbol of separation, the boundary between holiness and humanity, rips in half. You think of Sinai again, of smoke and thunder and distance. And now the distance collapses. A fringe theologian once said that the cross is where God finally lets himself be misunderstood without correcting it. The ultimate surrender of control. You look up through tears, expecting a shout, a miracle, another cosmic display of power. But there's nothing, no lightning, no vengeance.
Just the quietest words ever spoken from a dying God. It is finished. It takes you a moment to understand that he's not talking about his life. He's talking about the old order, the cycle of fear, punishment, obedience, the economy of wrath, the mythology of distance. Finished. And in that silence that follows, you feel something shift in the fabric of existence. The law once carved in stone dissolves into compassion. The covenant sealed with blood is replaced by one written in empathy. Historians still debate what happened next, the resurrection, the witnesses, the spread of faith. But you already know that the event itself is less important than what it symbolizes: the transformation of authority into vulnerability. The God who once demanded sacrifices has become one. The one who once flooded the earth now lets himself drown in mercy. You stand there long after the crowd has gone, long after the soldiers leave. The wind picks up, cool and soft, carrying the smell of myrrh and dust. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crows. And you understand. This wasn't the end of a story. It was the moment the author wrote himself into the narrative to prove that love can survive its own anger. The old tyrant died on that hill, and in his place, something entirely new was born. Something that no longer commands, but invites. And maybe that's all he ever wanted to become.
Morning breaks over an empty tomb. The world, it seems, has been rewritten overnight. You walk through the garden in silence, dew clinging to your feet, and you can almost feel the air humming, like creation itself is catching its breath after centuries of tension. No thunder, no plagues, no armies of angels storming through the clouds. Just absence, and then presence. The same story that began with divine distance now ends with closeness so human it almost hurts to look at. You remember the mountain, how the people trembled when God spoke. Now he stands among them, scarred, whispering, "Peace with you." The tyrant who once demanded perfection now blesses disbelief. Historians still argue what really happened that morning. Some call it myth, others memory, others metaphor. But you don't need to solve it. You can feel its meaning vibrating in your bones. Because even if the resurrection is poetry, it's the truest kind. The kind that tells you wrath doesn't have the last word. You walk through the city later that day and realize how quiet it feels. The temple bells still ring, the soldiers still march, but something invisible has shifted. Fear has lost its authority. The followers of the carpenter scatter across the empire, carrying a message that sounds almost reckless in its simplicity. God is love. You laugh softly. After all that fire and flood, after centuries of rules, wars, and thunder, it comes down to 3 words. A quirky detail you once read: early Christians were sometimes accused by Romans of being atheists, not because they didn't believe in gods, but because they stopped fearing them. It's almost poetic justice. The same divine presence that once ruled through terror now rules through tenderness. The same hand that smote nations now washes wounds. You think of Abraham's trembling, of Moses' pleading, of David's guilt, of Jeremiah's tears. Every generation had its version of the divine, each one a little softer, a little closer, a little more human. It's like watching eternity learn empathy in slow motion. Historians still debate whether this was evolution or revelation. Was God changing, or were we? Maybe both. Because what is faith if not a mirror polished by generations of awe and error until it finally reflects both heaven and humanity at once?
You walk beyond the city walls as twilight settles, and for the first time in this long journey, you feel peace that isn't conditional. No commandments, no curses, no cosmic bargaining, just presence, quiet, vast, and familiar. You close your eyes and think of the Old Testament God, the fire, the fury, the endless demands, and realize that maybe he was never a tyrant. Maybe he was just trying to teach a species that only learned through consequences. And now, after everything, you can almost hear him exhale. The silence that once felt terrifying now feels tender. The absence that once meant punishment now feels like trust. You sit down in the dust, watch the stars emerge, and understand the arc of it all. From command to conversation, from law to love, from distance to dwelling. The story that began with "Let there be light" ends here with the soft glow of understanding. Because the tyrant wasn't the villain of the story. The tyrant was the teacher. And the students, at last, have learned to listen without fear. So, breathe with me for a moment. The story has quieted now. The fires burn down to embers, and the voice that once echoed through deserts and storms has settled into a whisper, steady, familiar, almost human. You've walked through plagues and promises, stood beneath mountains that smoked, and wandered through cities built from obedience and ruin. You've seen what divine anger looks like up close, and what divine patience looks like after centuries of waiting. And somewhere along the way, maybe you noticed what changed. It wasn't just God. It was you. It was all of us. Humanity learning to trade terror for trust, thunder for tenderness, punishment for presence. The Old Testament wasn't just a record of wrath. It was a mirror of growing up. And every page turned a little closer toward understanding. So now, as the stars hang quiet above you and the night presses close, let yourself rest in the thought that maybe the tyrant was never a monster. Maybe he was mercy in disguise. The kind that breaks, that rebuilds, that finally learns to whisper instead of roar. You exhale. The dust settles. The story ends not with a command, but with peace. Sleep well, traveler. You've made it through the fire.